I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he's correct on it. I wish
And I
he
think
would.
he uses really great examples here
Yeah,
of how it's done well and, not so
I,
well.
yeah, and I wish he'd say it more. And you just quoted that, right? On page 62, he says, "What I'm arguing is that this aesthetic is finally a limiting one in terms of the making of lasting poetry. It displaces discipline of music and of argument, without which there can be no clarity of vision, which is the same as no vision, which is the same as no resonance."
Right.
And then he gives us an example of Amiri Baraka's poem Black Art, which is a good poem. Little indulgent, but yeah, good poem. And I think does make his point.
Yeah, he says, "Well, I can applaud the broadness of mind that chooses to offend many parties equally." And while I think Baraka makes an important point when he says, "Let there be no love poems written until love can exist freely and cleanly," the poem is finally an example of how identity can narrow a poem's scope and can obscure the talents of the writer that Baraka can also be.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, do you
it's
agree with
too
this?
narrow. Yeah.
You like this poem too.
I
I don't
like.
think it's a bad poem. I'm not. I think
I think
it's
it's.
like,
Yeah. I think it's indulgent. The R's.
yeah, I think the
It's
R's are really
indulgent. Yeah,
indulgent.
it's fucking indulgent. But poems are bullshit unless they are. Like, I mean, that's just a great fucking
A little
line.
bit, yeah.
Yeah, teeth or trees or lemons piled. Like, it's just like, that's. I like
Well,
that.
either really indulgent or really like, I mean, and
Yeah.
I think we both have tendencies toward these two things, either very indulgent or very like contracted, very
Right.
condensed, very tight, and brief. And,
But
but
But I also think Phillips is correct when he says that it narrows the scope. So it is a narrow thing. It's talking about a very
right,
narrow
he's saying
thing.
that this poem could accomplish more in the absence of that very narrow scope of just identity. If it were not
Right.
only identity, right? If that were just piece of it, right? It might do something else too, and therefore ultimately speak to more people, right? And that's sort of what he's talking about when he's talking about like transcending a moment, transcending your own identity, right? It has to exist outside of you and outside of your time. Whatever it is you're talking about has to exist outside of those two things enough to resonate with people outside of your moment and outside of you.
Yeah, outside of your
Right.
timeline, outside of your consciousness, if we're going to use the terms
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
book. But, and I think this is correct. It's not just this in terms of like identity. You could extend this argument out. Like I see this all the time, and it really gets under my skin. I see poets, contemporary poets, just casually throwing this out there where this is kind of like everything is political, right? All art is political. They'll just make this statement. No evidence, nothing to support it. They'll just say it and everybody just accepts it as true. But like that is such a narrow frame to view art. Like it is so narrow-minded to say that everything written down is this one, and not just political, but specifically contemporary American politics is everything. And I'm just like, no, like that is so narrow and closed-minded. Like you are not talking about poetry any longer. You're talking about politics, specifically contemporary politics. Like, and it drives me nuts that people just accept that as like a truth or like some big broad thing that nobody questions. I'm just like, no, like they're wrong. Like it's not true. Like no, not everything is political in terms of this. Like and they do these really weird rationalizations or these really weird rationalizations for identity or anything, and it's just a false framing. Like it's not real. Like it's made up one day and everybody
I
just
mean, I
accepts it.
think the whole everything is political is one of those things of like how much do you want to look at this in that particular lens, right? Like I think
Well,
that's
that's what I mean.
like I mean, yeah, like you could make
It's
that
a
phrasing.
narrow
Sorry, this is,
framework. Yeah.
but like in many cases, yeah, I would say like you have to do a lot of work, you know, to make a statement about a poem that is doing a lot of other things beyond just like talking.
I mean, everybody knows
like,
this.
I mean, yeah.
If you
everybody
scroll,
can make the argument that everything is political, right? Like, everything
if you scroll the timeline, this is all you see. This is all that's published all the time. Every major magazine. This is all we're allowed to talk about in contemporary poetry, at least in public settings. We can do it on this podcast. We can talk about it different ways. We can do it on our own, right? In our own conversations and stuff. But like, if it's literally reinforced and it's despicable, it's not accurate, and it's so narrow-minded. Like I said, it's like a non-artist way of thinking. If you're thinking about art in this sense, like, you are not an artist. Like, you are a political activist. I mean, that's what it is. But again, like, we can't have anything but. And I mean, like I said, Phillips is correct. He's 100% correct on this shit.
Yeah.
And he goes even further. It's his identity. He doesn't just talk about being black. He talks about AIDS, being gay, right? Like, all these different things you can throw into identity. You could talk about being white, but, all that. But that ends this entire essay, the last sentence in this whole essay is, the best writers produce work that resists easy limitation, and the best readers read accordingly. They impose no limits. And that's what I mean. Like, all of these things are limiting, narrowing scopes. Like, they're just the complete opposite of what art is supposed to be, right? Like, it's the complete
Well, and I feel
opposite.
this way whenever anybody names themselves a particular kind of writer, right? Like a particular kind of poet, or like, all of the people that I've met that are like, well, I want to be a regional writer. I want to write. My stories are all about people in North Carolina. Like, okay, great.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a little less limiting, but like, even the same, I'm a poet of resistance. I'm a resistance poet. And
that's always resistance to what, right? Like,
I write activism poetry, or I, like, it's all so limiting, I think.
Yeah, it is. And it'll, and I think the point he's making,
why put
broader,
yourself in that hole?
Right, is that if you're going to put yourself in that limiting framework, well, then you're not going to transcend the timeline that you currently occupy. So when you're dead and gone, your poems are not going to be remembered as much, because nobody alive remembers that time. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, like, we don't remember what it was like to live in fucking 1500s in goddamn England, but we still like Shakespeare. I mean, I have no idea what living like that was like, but his stuff transcends all that, so it's like not. Yeah, and you think it's such an easy point. Like, it's such a simple thing to just understand, and everybody understands it. Everybody knows it. Like, everybody knows what we're saying. Like, it's not a hard concept to grasp, but we like have to keep pretending that it's like, I don't know, that like it can't be an obvious truth. I don't know. Yeah, we can move on from this.